So how's Omaha, man?
Omaha's great this time of year. We have sunny 55-degree weather, blue skies. You never know when the last sunny day is, so definitely going to get out and grab a run this afternoon because it might snow over the weekend. You just don't know this time of year.
Yeah. So obviously we've known each other forever. You're a Southern California guy like myself. Are you born and raised in San Diego? Were you born in here, or did you moved to Southern California from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was born in Idaho and lived there till I was like 7 or 8. Moved around a bunch of places in like Western U.S. Landed in Southern California when I was about 10, and then moved to San Diego at 12. So I always had this context that California, as beautiful as it is, and how much opportunity there is, that there's always like life outside of California.
Yeah. So how has that been? I mean, coming out of California, you've been in the tech scene. You're in Omaha. Amazing place to live. Obviously, some pretty successful people. Warren Buffett being one that's done pretty well out there. How's that transition been?
It's been great. It's the perfect time of life for me, I think, to move to a place like this. My wife of 17 years now, she and I met each other at Rancho Bernardo High School, where I met you, and it was an awesome journey and a great place to grow up. But as we put our children into school, and I continue to build my career as an entrepreneur, there was a lot of reasons why we felt like getting out of California and getting in the middle of the country made sense. And there's a couple things about living in Omaha that I just cherish every single day, is the quality of life, the education, the values, the Midwestern culture. Like, this is a perfect place to have my family and my children at this stage of life. And then secondly, there's this like undercover entrepreneurial scene in Omaha, and like massive companies here that have made millionaires, that many of these entrepreneurs and these corporate executives give back, and whether it's their time or their money. And so I found just a really great tribe of mix of sort of big time executives and startup folks alike, to really just kind of like build my network. And it's been almost 3 years now, and not once have I regretted the move.
It's the COVID thing, especially, I think, accelerated this, but I think it's so good for the startup world in general. I mean, and we're similar age. I know I'm a couple of years ahead of you, but we grew up in a world where, the Silicon Valley was the mecca of the tech scene, and it still is in many ways. And that may not change for a while, but with this advent of just more people being remote, you're seeing all these different cities pop up that, have been around for a while, but, like Salt Lake City and, Austin, and even Phoenix is starting to get a little bit, and, Southern California and Omaha. I think it's really great. I think that it just gives more opportunity for people to be creative, to feel like they can go out there and raise money, to create disruptive companies. There's talent pools, and it doesn't all have to concentrate out in that, San Francisco, San Jose area.
Yeah, and look, I mean, as near and dear as the Silicon Valley is to my heart, and growing up in California, feeling that sun on your skin when you get off the plane, it just never gets old. But you get outside of California and you realize that talent is everywhere, and opportunity historically hasn't been. So I think like spreading that out, and seeing the movement like you're seeing in Miami right now, where a couple of VCs just show up and say, hey, let's make this the next Silicon Valley. And then you see, the mayor and the governor kind of saying like, hey, let us know how we can help. It's really just inspirational to see, folks finding their way, finding happiness, and really not letting location be an obstacle to their success. Right. That's the key to it all.
Yeah. So taking a step back, I've had a couple of guests on the show, people that I've known for, a long time, 20 plus years, some ex-college teammates, et cetera. But we actually go back farther than that, huh? I mean, I think you're the first guy that, goes back to high school, possibly even maybe middle school, when we started, playing sports against each other.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, I definitely remember, during football camp freshman year, my first time like walking onto Rancho Bernardo High School, and number 65, this blue chip tackle leading the team. And so certainly like going to all of the games, and watching you guys on Friday nights, there's this certain sense of like idolization around when you're a freshman and you see the guys on varsity, and certainly being an offensive lineman, and you were the top dog, on the offensive line, which is saying a lot, because there was a lot of talent on that offensive line, right? With Mitch White, and you weren't the only guy up there. But certainly you were the one that right out of high school, got the best opportunity and went to San Diego State. So in all my recruiting trips down there, and always seeing you around down there at San Diego State, it was always great to like have that sort of like person to look up to. And I remember seeing you when I was in first period. You'd walk by my math class, and I'd always like think, oh, this is cool. This guy says hi to me, and then I think we played some basketball against each other in the rec leagues through high school and stuff. So it was just cool to always know you and look up to you. And then when we reconnected, like professionally, that was awesome.
Yeah, no, it really was. Thank you for that, by the way. I guess that's the power of being the upperclassman in high school, right? But you obviously had a fantastic career in high school. You had an opportunity to play at the collegiate level. Sounds like it didn't go exactly right out of high school, but you persevered, and you obviously ended up at San Jose State. So maybe talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I would say that really my kind of college journey started when I was like 4 or 5. I remember asking my dad, like, Dad, where am I going to go to college? And my mother and father didn't go to school, and we grew up in some pretty adverse situations, especially financially at times. There was 5 of us. I was the middle of 5 kids, and I remember asking my dad where he thought I should go to college, and he kind of laughed at me and said, "You better get a college scholarship if you're going to go." And he walked me through the math of putting 5 kids through school, and we already knew that there wasn't enough to go around. So I just had it in my mind that I was going to find a way to get to school. And so out of high school, I had one offer, and it was to Idaho State in Pocatello, Idaho, playing in the Big Sky. I went up there sort of expecting it to be everything that I had hoped. And, that first year wasn't easy. I blew out my shoulder, had a surgery. Our entire coaching staff got fired. And then I came home for Christmas break, and my mother passed away. And so like being dealt all those blows in the first semester, it was really sort of a time in my life where I felt like I needed to change direction to do something else. But I didn't have anything else lined up. And so fortunately, the new coach from Idaho State, a guy named Larry Lewis, who was not like the most loved guy in the world, but I always found that the hardest coaches to deal with are the ones that I remember and think about the most. And I never had a bad, relationship with Larry, but he flew to my mom's funeral and basically challenged my logic and said, Charlie, if you stay here, what are you going to do? How are you going to help your little brother and sister? Like they're in high school, like you need to get your degree. That's what your mom wanted. So fortunately, Coach Lewis, kind of drugged me back up to campus in Pocatello. And I went back up there and finished out my redshirt year. And then I got the opportunity to start a bunch of games, played all 5 positions. In my second year, I was an offensive lineman like you. So I played center, right guard, right tackle, left tackle, and really got the experience, the on-field experience that gave me the confidence in knowing that, look, like I love these guys I'm playing with up here. I like certain parts about living in Pocatello, but by that time, my high school girlfriend had become a very serious part of my life. And fortunately, I stuck with her. She stuck with me, I should say, because we've built a wonderful life together now as husband and wife. But in those days, she was going to UC Davis, and I really wanted to get back to California. So really without much of a plan, I packed up my 84 Honda Accord. I drove all the way down the 15 to Rancho Bernardo from Idaho, and kind of spent that summer getting my stuff together and working to save a little bit of money. And then that's when the coaches from Palomar, they found out from our common coach, Damon Baldwin. He had plugged them in that I was back in town, and he really thought that there would probably be an opportunity for maybe him to recruit me if I kind of went to Palomar. And so fortunately, Coach B hooked it up and let those guys know I was in town, and they weren't going to let me not play on the team that year.
It's amazing. It's amazing how, how big of an impact coaches make in people's lives, right? I mean, just that experience of a coach, coming to fly in, during, arguably probably one of the most difficult times in your entire life. And, really, yeah, maybe a little bit because they want you back and this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, it's because they care about you as a man and they want the best thing for you as a man. So I love hearing stories about that. The junior college level it's brutal, right? I mean, and what I mean by that is it's like a pack of, I don't want to say wild dogs, but like it's a bunch of people coming in and they all have this dream to get to the next level. And in many cases, they're willing to do whatever it takes. They'll step on anybody's throat. They will go to any lengths to get to that next level. And, the people who are able to get in there and be successful and get to that next level, like, you got to compete, right? You got to persevere. Like, it's not easy. And if you're weak or, you're not willing to put it in, like, they'll run you out there. I mean, I think that's the one thing about sports in general is just the meritocracy nature of it. And, and I think that's what, applies so well to the entrepreneurial world. But, what was that experience like, or what was your mindset in when you got there and you just had this, like, no, I'm going to be one of the guys that makes it?
Well, I would say, having the perspective of going off to play at a 4-year school, I remember being in the dorms my freshman year, and we would all tell these jokes about our buddy who stayed home to, take the semester off or go to junior college. And, the next thing you know, this guy's 18, he's got a truck payment and a tattoo on his arm that he financed, and he's got to go work at the mill because he can't really take his education seriously. So I had a couple things sort of like to really keep front of mind when I was going into junior college. One, I was back at home, like right in front of my dad, my little brother and sister. And, my mom had passed away and things weren't going like super well at home. And there was a lot of challenges that were presented as a byproduct of that. But I always looked at like happiness as a choice. And the closer I got to adulthood, the more sort of influence I was going to have on my own personal happiness. And I knew that playing college football and seeing myself on television was a goal that I set when I was a young kid, and that I was going to execute that goal. And that year I spent a lot of time, you play your game in junior college in the morning, and a lot of times, the guys would go out after the game, and not that I missed any parties, but a lot of times I would really cherish these moments where I'd get to go home after the game and watch a couple games with my dad. And so we were watching guys play on TV, and I'm just going, I can do this. I know I could be there. I know I can do this. I just have to keep working. And despite all the distractions, all the things that can pop up at junior college, I was able to put my studies in front of me. I knew exactly what I needed to do to bounce back and transfer back to a Division I school. Because, remember, this is before the transfer portal, right? Like, this is before kids could just, get upset with a coach and go find a new school. Like, it took some real grit and resolve to actually, like, transfer from one institution to another and within the NCAA. And you start seeing all the, like, changes now, and you, like, get a little kind of, like, upset sometimes, thinking like, why do they make it so hard on kids? It's great to see that things are going in a better way for the players and the kids, don't get me wrong, but I also think back to that second year that I was at Idaho State and how hard it was to really just grind through that. But it really gave me this sort of appreciation and understanding of being back at Palomar, and I'm back in San Diego, and I'm playing with guys that I saw them on Prep Pigskin review on the Friday nights. And I remember these guys winning championships at Oceanside High School and playing against these guys at Vista High School. And now we're together. Plus, we've got some guys from Orange County, some guys bouncing back from the Marines. You just have this ragtag motley crew of dudes. And I'll never forget my first practice going out there. And it's in the summertime. So you're thinking like, there's no pads. You're just kind of shorts and shirts. And Coach Kraft, who went on to coach at San Diego State, and was just like probably the craziest offensive mind that I ever met, and just so effective as a coach. He lined us up, and we get out there in the first practice, and I line up against Tony Sale. God rest his soul. He's passed away now, but this is Junior Sale's little brother. He was fresh out of prison. He actually went in prison, spent maybe 10 years in prison, maybe more, for a fight that broke out at high school when he was a freshman, and the person ended up dying in the course of action there. So I'm lined up against Tony. He was not a guy that you really wanted to run into in a dark alley. And we got no pads on, and we're going one-on-one. I'm center, he's nose guard. And it was an absolute battle. And when I saw how hard he was going and how physical he was playing, that sort of heightened my competitive arousal. And next thing you know, like, we're both, shirts are ripped off, chests are bleeding. His fingernails were about this long at the time. And I just knew right then it was going to be a knife fight every single week. If you wanted to play junior college football, you literally were standing in the way of somebody else's dream on the other side of the ball from you, and they were going to play harder than they were going to play at any other level in football. So while I had this experience playing at the Division I level up at Idaho State, I was able to bounce back and take a lot of the learnings and coachings that I learned up there. I really got around this group of guys that, and it's as close to a gang, I think, as I'll ever be in my life. But I look back on some of these guys, whether they were Hispanic, Black, Polynesian, white, like, we were all there just ragging on each other, pushing each other, partying together, won a bunch of games. It was just such a great experience. And it was not exactly what I expected it to be honest with you.
And then you get to San Jose State. Was the experience any different there, or was it similar?
No, it was, San Jose State was amazing. So going back to this would have been the 2000 season when I was playing at junior college. One of those games I was telling you that I was watching with my dad that year was number 9 TCU, led by LaDainian Tomlinson, rolls into Spartan Stadium on a Friday night. And San Jose State put it to them, and they tore down the goalposts and they stormed the field. And I'm watching on TV going, man, that's amazing, Dad. Like, that's a great place. Like, this program is up and coming. And this coach, the guy who was coaching the team there was named Dave Baldwin. And I kind of took note on that team earlier that year because they played USC all the way to the fourth quarter. They had already beaten Stanford. Then when they knocked off TCU, I was like, man, I want to go there. So they automatically got high on my list. Plus, it was 100 miles away from Davis, where my wife, Katie, was a student at the time. And so it just seemed like a good natural fit. Now, throughout the course of the season, I got a ton of attention from some really great schools. A lot of schools that I knew that if I went and played there, I'd already had the context of seeing these programs. The junior college guys sometimes come in and just fill a number. They're just kind of like a spot on the depth chart. And I really wanted to stay away from like holding a bag in practice or running scout team. Like, I really wanted to go. I had 2 more years left and I wanted to play. And I knew that I could play at that level. But right at the end of the year, Coach Baldwin and his whole staff got fired. And so that really took a lot of wind out of my sails because I'd already been through the disappointment of the like unproductive recruiting process coming out of high school. And a story for another day is how I ended up getting connected at Idaho State, because it all goes back to actually guys that Coach Baldwin knew that were GAs with him at San Diego State. A guy named Joe Green and a guy named John Ely really kind of like connected to get me into Idaho State. But I just didn't want to squander my last 2 years of playing college football. So I started exploring all these other opportunities. And then I got a call one day on my mobile phone. It was like my first Nokia mobile phone I ever had. And it was a guy named Bob Conley, who was the offensive line coach at San Jose State. He had been recruiting me, and he got rehired. So that was like a huge turn of events. Fitz Hill had just come in as the head coach. He was the head coach in waiting at Arkansas and the assistant head coach there. And he came in and brought a staff of Arkansas folks. And luckily, Bob got the job. So he brought me up that weekend, had a great recruiting trip. The previous weekend, my tight end and one of my best friends from Palomar had been up on a trip. So I'll never forget that Sunday when they kind of march you in and you talk to the head coach after you've kind of been out partying for 2 nights and meeting all the guys and getting to know the city. I was in love with San Jose. You know, it was the heart of the Silicon Valley. We went out downtown, got to know like the whole scene. And I thought, man, this is a place I could go. Great guys. And then Coach Hill brought me in. He said, Charlie, we'd like to offer you a scholarship. We'd like you to come back up, and we need you here next week because classes are starting, because this is middle of the year. This is January. I said, Coach, you know, my only concern is I don't know where I'd live. I don't know what a roommate I'd have and stuff. And I know my friend Seth Deo, my Palomar tight end, he was up here last weekend. You know, I know you offered him a scholarship and he's kind of waiting for another offer. But, you know, if Seth could come up here, I know it would really help my transition, make me a lot more comfortable. And Coach Shaw, I'll never forget this. He looks at me and goes, son, if I was going to go into a foxhole with you, and I said, Charlie, would you like to come into my foxhole? And then you said, I'll come into your foxhole if Seth can come into the foxhole. I'd really start to question whether or not I needed you in my foxhole or not. It's like, you're right, Coach. I'm good. I'll see you Monday. And that was Sunday morning. I flew home that afternoon. I packed 2 suitcases. I flew back up on Monday, started classes on Wednesday, had nowhere to live. Another teammate, Patrick Battle, a Castle Park guy, let me stay on his floor. That lasted for about 2 weeks until one night his snake got out of the cage and curled up on my back while I was sleeping on the floor just to stay warm. And then after that, I moved back into the dorms. But I mean, it was kind of a weird winding path to like probably the most influential stage of my life was those 2 years I spent at San Jose State.
I bet. I love that story. First of all, because I've known you for as long as I have, and I've known you professionally, and you know, I know you're in the CEO and now really in the investor world, but you know, you cut your teeth in many ways as a really successful VP of sales. So I love the little sales pitch that you had to throw in there early on. It's just amazing that you get offered a scholarship and it's like, yeah. But let's talk a little bit about what else we can do here. Like, what else can you throw in for me? Yeah.
Yeah. What a silly move. But you know what? Those 2 years at San Jose State, like, being in the heart of the Silicon Valley and really like one thing about playing football at San Jose State is like you have to work hard to earn the attention because there's so much going on inside of that world where like kind of mid-major college football program isn't the like highest priority on everybody's mind. So it gave me the opportunity to really kind of see a group of guys on my team, and I met just a ton of people through the ecosystem that just really I found out like that place hustles. Like the Silicon Valley is all about hustle. And you definitely, as a kid that doesn't come from a lot of privilege, you definitely see how the guys up in Palo Alto had an easier path, and it kind of gives you that chip on your shoulder, the haves versus the have-nots. So I really attribute my sort of ability, and I don't want to say success as an entrepreneur, because like your whole job as an entrepreneur is just to like not die and have to like go get a real job. And so the fact that I've been able to kind of like stay in the startup world, be a founder, co-founder, and just kind of like exist now as an aspiring investor, I attribute a lot of it to just like finding happiness outside of like your immediate day job. So San Jose State wasn't a great program while I was there. There was plenty of challenges on the field, and there was always somebody dividing something on the team or somebody taking issue with something. And really it like I figured out like my superpower at San Jose State was like I could go in and make everybody laugh just by like keeping a smile on my face, showing up with some energy. If somebody was having a bad day or they're irritated about this, I could kind of point out, well, guys, like at least it's not raining today. So yeah, we got to go practice, but like, look how beautiful the weather is in the South Bay. And of course, like a lot of probably less appropriate things and ways of getting people to laugh. But I felt like that's where I kind of discovered my ability to be a unifier and a motivator and a leader. And I was able to do that and work on the side so I could afford a car and have a cell phone and a girlfriend. So like Silicon Valley and San Jose really is like a place that I'll never forget, because it just opened my eyes to how big the world was and how much opportunity was out there. And that 90% of it was your mindset and your attitude.
So, yeah, I mean, I can say that having worked with you and following your career and kind of going in and out of our lives professionally, you're and self-proclaimed like a SaaS startup tech like geek. Like you're a student of the game. Like I've learned a ton from you in my career. I mean, you follow the industry, you know what's going on, you know the trends, you know where the ball is moving. You overlay that with your, I guess probably started your career in the logistics space and supply chain, and you've really carved out an amazing niche for yourself. But the question I have is, I mean, as you're going through, the ranks in college football and kind of doing that battle, I mean, the misnomer is that you're student athletes. Like you're really athlete students. I mean, people don't want to hear that, but that's just the fact of life. Is that when that love or that passion for technology developed, or is that something that happened, after your career started?
Well, I would say that, I'm from this like kind of strange generation where not a millennial, not a full millennial, but certainly was an early adopter of technology. Like I got the video games when I was like 5 years old, 6 years old. Got into mobile phones in high school and PCs, and really like flirted with my wife via American Online Instant Messenger, and so like had enough exposure to the digital side. And plus, I had a little brother and sister who are squarely in that millennial generation, so I was kind of on that cusp. And then certainly going to school in San Jose, like we were very gifted and had the opportunity to like get exposed to technology through school, and probably more of a digital experience by going to school in the early 2000s than most kids had. But I was always interested in technology, and frankly, part of going to San Jose State was the dot-com boom was like in full effect, and it tanked while I was there, like in 2000, 2001. And so seeing that whole kind of downtown area shrivel and see things change, it was kind of a depressing time. Still got exposed to a lot of technology, a lot of entrepreneurship, but like when I got out of school, there wasn't these $100,000 a year software sales jobs that like my buddies had gotten a couple of years before. So that was a little bit depressing. And like I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I had no money and no skills. And so the next best thing for me was I was reading the Forbes 400, and I saw that a lot of these guys, the most successful guys, that started off in B2B sales, a lot of them sold copiers. So I thought like I needed to get into copier sales, and that led me on this journey of applying with 50, 60, 70 companies, went to 40 plus first interviews, went on a bunch of field rides, and my criteria was like very clear. It was like, I want somewhere with super aggressive training in a business that I can grow within. So I wanted a bigger company. And the company I started with wasn't that big then. They've gone on to become a multi-billion-dollar a year company. But I started off like going door to door selling overnight shipping with a company called Worldwide Express. And it was a franchise-based company. I was the first guy hired in the Sacramento office. So it had this startup feel. My manager, Ryan Venturing, awesome dude. He had played college football at University of Minnesota. We completely bonded on the first interview. And I'm like, dude, this guy could teach me some things. He was driving a Lincoln, wearing a suit every day, and he wasn't that much older than me. So I was like, okay, if this guy can do it, I can do it. But really what that instilled was this like framework of success. Like the basic sales training there was so intense. It was a full suit organization. I found out that if you could win the kind of prize for the best role play at the end of the week, you'd get a Mont Blanc pen and they'd give you $1,000. So my dumb ass goes out, takes my wife's credit card, and she's my girlfriend then, and I go to Nordstrom. I buy myself a really nice suit. I buy myself some really nice shoes. The total was just under $1,000, and I felt like, well, I'm going to kind of use this to finance, my success, and then I'll win the pen. I got second. I lost, but I at least made an impression on people that like I was there to take this seriously, and I was going to take my career seriously. So Worldwide Express was the perfect organization to kind of get into early on. Some of my mentors there are still mentors and dear friends today, and people that like relationships I cherish, and I learned a ton. But the real, I think, opportunity inside of that, and the thing that I never could have picked, like, was that getting into logistics in 2003, as eBay and Amazon were just becoming household names, it was kind of, I could connect that dot. I could see like, okay, well, like I started using eBay in high school. My parents don't trust these online marketplaces and putting their credit cards online, but like eventually everybody will. And through college, I use those services a lot more. So I could see that, okay, maybe this parcel shipping thing, it's going to grow. And what I didn't expect was like how e-commerce and this whole entire kind of like intersection of transportation and technology was just going to become like such a focal point, a curiosity center for me. So in right out of like school, as I was doing sales, I would always look at these. You'd go door to door and like literally walk into a shipping dock and just say, hey, I want to introduce myself to the owner, wearing a full suit, like a complete douche. And I would see these big piles of packages in these e-commerce companies. And I would think to myself, like, how do I get that? And then quickly figured out that to get that, you had to automate the process and you had to live in the checkout. Well, my company, Worldwide Express, didn't have that ability, but we were a reseller for Airborne Express and eventually DHL, and their systems could do that. So I taught myself SQL at like 23 years old to figure out how to integrate these databases. Did a horrible job. I can't believe some of these people even like let me come to their warehouse at night after I was done working and integrate these systems. But like I figured it out. There was no YouTube at that time, so it was all kind of like SQL for dummies and calling in favors and remoting in developers via GoToMyPC. I had my own subscription. And, really just kind of like stayed curious and like watched the industry evolve. And then, had some great success at Worldwide, couple small exits in my 20s. And I got off on my own in my late 20s, went back to Rancho Bernardo, our hometown, and started a couple of logistics companies. And as e-commerce really kind of took hold, I started seeing opportunities popping up to digitize certain parts of supply chain and transportation. Didn't know how to do it, didn't know what to do. But in 2012, I was in San Francisco for a business event. There was a huge crowd of people waiting for cabs. I was waiting in line. I couldn't get a cab. My standard, method is just stand in front of everybody and be bigger and hold up my arm. And that wasn't working. So as I'm waiting for the cab, I see this guy go like, pulls out his phone. iPhones were brand new back then, 2 years old. He pulls out his phone. Next thing you know, a black car pulls up and picks him up like 5 minutes later. I'm like, holy shit, man. Like, how did you do that? He's like, he's getting in the car. He's like, it's the Uber, download the Uber. So I did. And then like the next day I took a town car and that like just changed my life. I just knew that was going to change supply chain and logistics and I wanted to be a part of that. And so spent the next kind of year and a half trying to figure out like, what do I do? What's my path? How do you raise venture capital? Like, who's working on interesting things? And that was kind of a real big turning point for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then you joined Cargomatic, right? As the head of sales there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Real early on.
So that was just like, Yeah, but it was just staying in touch. It was networking. So this was a friend of mine who I'd gotten to know in my logistics company. He had warehouses in LA, and he knew I had this background of scaling sales teams and stuff, and kept trying to get in touch with me. And we missed each other a bunch. And he finally told me what he's working on. He's like, have you heard of Uber? I said, I love Uber. I want to make Uber for trucking. He's like, well, we just made an app. We don't know what to do with it. We want to get you involved. And so I drove to LA the next day from San Diego. He showed me the app. It was him and his co-founder, Jonathan Kessler. This guy's name is Brett Parker. Showed it to me in an apartment on the west side of LA, and I just fell in love. And I said, like, how do I get involved? So, that led to, a couple of discussions, became employee number one, wrote an angel check into the business, and spent about a year and a half really like learning how to raise venture capital, how to build, a team, how to give product feedback. And like, that was my first time working with like Harvard people and like really, really high level intellectual people, and working shoulder to shoulder with them and having them look at me and go like, oh my gosh, you know so much about this industry. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, you know so much about everything else. So it was just like a perfect fit for me and my natural curiosity. And it was also at a good time, Greg, because like when I was running my two companies, they were lifestyle businesses. I was coaching high school football at Rancho Bernardo, like really enjoying like how I was spending my time. But in the back of my mind, also wondering like, am I falling behind? Like, that was a great time for me to like focus on my family, build something that was meaningful, like be close to my wife, who became my business partner. She gave birth to our two oldest children, and like we would bring them to our office. And so it was a great time in my personal life and my family, but professionally, I started seeing all this innovation. The venture capital was coming back around, although people weren't investing in supply chain yet. And it just seemed like a great time for me to kind of like refocus, reinvigorate, reengage. And then, Cargomatic led to my experience and my involvement with ShipHawk, an early stage team. Was able to help them that's where I learned a lot about SaaS sales. And we pivoted that company from a digital freight marketplace to a software product and an API first company. And then, after ShipHawk, a guy that I knew tweeted out that they were looking for a VP of sales at a little startup in San Diego called events.com. And then you and I got to spend about a year and a half working together, which was an incredible time.
It was. And it was a great year and a half. No, it's a fantastic story.
It was a great year and a half in some ways, but I think there was also a lot of learnings and stuff in terms of like, we were untangling some really, really challenging problems there. And, but it gave us a chance, I think, to sharpen up.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I mean, it definitely started this, from my personal story, it started this weird niche that maybe I found where I became this like turnaround guy, where I got pulled into these, kind of messes, right? I mean, there are these startups, they had raised capital, they had investors, they had boards, little traction, an opportunity existed, but they just were, just kind of spinning around in circles. And obviously things could have gone a lot of different ways. And in most cases, they're going in the wrong way. And, they, bring you in and you sort of got this pile of clay that you got to work with, and you got to figure out how to turn this thing around and make it a successful business. And, there was some strange legacy there, and we were dealing with a lot of things with that company, but, I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish there. And I mean, that company still to this day, it's around and it's doing well, and it's a platform that people use. And, there's people whose livelihood is, still to this day based on a lot of the work that we put in there. I mean, that platform that was built, like they hadn't written one line of that code until I got there. I was part of that. And you came in and you helped legitimize the sales team and build out the sales process. And I mean, in retrospect, we did really well there. I mean, we scaled that things to many, many millions of dollars in revenue in a very short period of time on a true SaaS based platform. So, it's that was quite the journey, man. And I remember that process too. And I remember when you reached out to me, and I had remembered you and those types of things. But I don't think we had known each other professionally. And and I remember through that interview process, you really just wowed everybody with sort of your strategic thought process. It wasn't just what you had done. It was, your approach to how you wanted to do things. And, I know that Greg Parise, our CEO at the time, was really impressed. And I think you came in and you lived up to the billing. Actually, a question I have for you, because I think a lot of people can get pigeonholed into the sales world, right? And you're a really gregarious guy and just a gifted, talented sales guy. And I think that, to your point, you were really good at building teams and really good at managing people and good at motivating people, which made you a great VP of sales. But you've moved on and you've been a CEO, and now you're in really almost the VC world, if anything. How was that transition? Because that's not an easy transition. A lot of people have a hard time breaking out of that sales world and getting into the operational or the executive world.
Yeah, so I think there's a few elements of it. First off, I'm a fourth generation salesperson, so I think the gift of gab is what the Irish people call it, and I was fortunate to be able to speak in public without being nervous and these other things that I realized, and also have a dad that was a very gifted people person, and really I've got like an older sister who's like very eloquently spoken and has built a big business of her own, and so like growing up with that confidence and knowing that like, hey, I can talk my way out of this is like a blessing and a curse. But I would also say that when my dad would tell me, you're going to be a salesman when you grow up, I would always have this chip on my shoulder, like, we'll see. Like, I'm going to own that company, and that's what I want to do. And so I just committed early in my life that I want to be an entrepreneur at some point. And I knew that was going to require a more well-rounded skill set, and you have to be, versed in all the disciplines. And so I think that was, sort of like where I started sales from, was that I was like sort of going to be a stepping stone for me, or, I needed that training. And I'm certainly glad that that's where I started. But I also worked my way into general management, like very early in my career. So I had P&L ownership, which forces you to understand finance and operations, and really like logistics and supply chain, like sales and operations are closely intertwined, because if you're not, it's such a transactional executional business that you can sell all you want, but if you can't fulfill, like the relationship ends and the conversation's over. So I think just the kind of like customer service nature and the customer retention nature of building a residual business like logistics has been critical in my path as well. And then I think as far as, jumping into business ownership and really using my own capital, and I never raised external capital for the companies that I owned on my own, and probably would now, knowing what I know now. But back then, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think it really just forced me to understand how a company or a model makes their money. And then if you understand that sales is merely one function in the business, but you're committed to that function because it's a primary function and one of the most important, then I think it just like always helped me keep in context that there's a bigger picture. The world doesn't stop and start with sales, but we have to be very good at sales. So I knew that early in my career that like there was going to be a natural progression from sales to sales leadership. And I spent a bunch of time, in GM roles. And then as I got into these venture-backed things, it was very clear that if you don't sell, you die. And it gave me the opportunity, working in great teams, it gave me the opportunity to wholly focus on sales. And like the cool thing is there's no original thought anymore. All the answers are out there. Somebody's run this playbook before. You got to find the playbook that works the best, and then you got to be able to run it at least as good as they did. But you should be able to run it better because now you have the perspective. So every day I sell. All I do is sell. Selling myself, selling a vision, selling a relationship, potential. And so I think in my current role in kind of working in corporate innovation and investment, like understanding that these large organizations have their own way of being sold to, and oftentimes startups don't understand that language. I'm seeing that this is a fascinating sort of problem to be working on, and I'm having fun doing this project because the language of sales is not universal, and like organizational size, structure, culture, all of these things will impact what those sales protocols look like. And organizations really need to be built to sell, and then large organizations aren't always really built to buy very well if you don't understand their kind of language. So it all comes back to money going from one pocket to the other, and kind of the release of that comes down to communication, which is sales.
Yeah, I think you make an amazing point there, and something that's so true. I mean, I've been in situations in my career where, I'm essentially a salesperson, I'm a business development person. And,
Sure.
now, having moved beyond that and to more of, executive leadership, management, those types of things, I'll get asked all the time, about that sales background. And I have to explain to people, I sell way more as a CEO of a company than I ever sold when I was a salesperson. And I know that sounds kind of counterproductive, but but you nailed it. Like, you're selling your vision, you're selling yourself, you're selling your company, you're selling your product, right? Your employees have to believe in you. They have to believe in the vision that you're set. Your investors, they need to believe in you. They need to believe in your company and where you're going, right? You need to be able to sell partners. That's what you're doing on a day in, day out basis. So it really does prepare you well, especially if you have some of those other backgrounds. So, we talked a little bit about your ability to build teams. I think that that's something that you pride yourself on. It's something that I've experienced firsthand. When you look at recruiting people, when you look at building a team of people, what are sort of the qualities that you try to find in somebody that you want to bring on board that you think is going to be successful working with you and for you?
So I think I'm going to answer that in a couple phases, like I always do. Too long, probably, but I think first off, you have to always hire for passion. Then somebody, in the logistics technology world and a lot of business I've been involved with, I think you either had to have passion in logistics or you have to have passion in technology. And in the early days of supply chain tech kind of expansion over the last 10 years, you had to hire for one side or the other. And as long as there was some passion there, you could teach the other technical parts. And the further I go in my career, the more I realize this is a very big world. And everybody was born to do something. And the absolute best thing you could do as a leader and a team builder is find the human that was born to do the behavior or the work that you have available for them, and stop what you're doing when you meet that person. Stop everything, hire that person, put all of your energy into getting them on board and getting them up to speed. Take great care of them, get them the package they need. If you have to pay a little bit more, it's fine. Cut it out of the next hire. But the person born to do that job is the only person you want to work with. And at this point in my life, I don't want to work on projects where I have enough time to let these underdeveloped talents develop into their role. Now, this doesn't go for like entry level roles, right? Like most of the time in executive level positions over the last 5 years, I've been spending my time hiring the executives that are going to really steer the business. And what I found, especially in those executive level roles, is if you can find somebody born to do what you need them to do, stop what you're doing, hire them, and get out of their way. Give them everything they need, listen to them regularly, break down the obstacles and the roadblocks, but just let them do their job. And then when you get the right person in the right role, it's like poetry in motion. And as the leader, you feel weightless and you feel almost like there's going to be an hour or two every day where you're kind of bored and you're going to have to fight the temptation to go walk the floor and meddle and turn screws. Because really, I found this out at the business we moved out here to acquire here in Omaha, Manning Truck Brokerage. I got in and I had to make some kind of radical changes right off the bat and, move some people around, install some technology and everything. But once we got that past that first 5-6 months, I looked around, I realized like we have the best human beings in the world running this operation. And the only thing I can do to make this better is to go hire the best sales team out here to support them, because anything else I do is just going to be disruptive and meddling to the business. And so I'm always going to be grateful for the guy, Chad Ingersoll, that ran the business over there, and Tina Reimer and Chris Newby, and these, some of the people I hired, Blaine Neufeld, Sam Blount. We were able to kind of take this amazing machine and then put a world-class sales team on top of it, because we were so good at executing. When I would show the operation to these heavy hitter salespeople, they're like, yeah, that's it. That's all I need right there. That group right there can make me successful. So you got to put the right people in the right seats. And what I found is that most of the time, organizations are full of all the right people in the wrong roles. So it's not always easy to shift. But if you can get people to believe that you have their best interests in mind and the best interests of the company in mind, which shouldn't be difficult, right? If you can just be humble and communicate honestly, then you just get the right people in the right roles and you get out of their way. And that's when life becomes fun, in my opinion.
So your CEO days, obviously not done. I'm sure you have many more startups in your future as an operator, as a founder. but you're now, as we talked about, sort of an investor, right? You're working a little bit more in the VC world, and I know Zebox is an accelerator. I'm sure you're involved in the selection of these different companies, helping incubate these companies. You're making your own personal investments. I'm sure you're making recommendations to others. When you see a startup, what are you looking for? Is it the idea? Is it the team? I know it's a combination of both, but help me, get in your head a little bit with your thought process when you see a company, you're like, yeah, this is a winner, or like, these guys, I'm not putting my money here.
So I guess, a lot of, Scott, my investment journey was born in these operational endeavors, like joining the team early at Cargomatic and ShipHawk and Airspace. And for me, it was a very validating feeling to know that, like, hey, Charley's not a wealthy guy. He's putting a little bit of money into this thing. He's rolling up his sleeves. He's taking a full-time role in this. He's changing his LinkedIn. He's going all in. He's at the conventions, and he's here to help us, drive this business forward. And what I found was that conviction and being steeped in the operation and everything else gave me this view of like the common problems inside of startups and the common pitfalls. And then, when I took the role at Manning's and I kind of got things like normalized here, I had the opportunity to start kind of networking and meeting some early stage startups, and founders were approaching me. Had by that time raised venture capital in 3 different businesses, so I had a decent network of VCs from the supply chain and logistics space that were always interested in kind of networking and staying in touch on different opportunities. So, I took that opportunity while I was in the CEO role at a larger company, was to like start giving back and mentoring a little bit, and then advisory roles presented themselves. And what I found is I was helping companies solve the same problems, and I was doing it in a fraction of the time that I had done them in when I was previously operating the business, because I realized there was a few things that I'm super good at in these startup in the startup context, and everything else I suck so bad at. And there's somebody else that's so good at doing these things. So it's like the perfect time in life, I think, for me to share what I've learned. I've always believed that advice should be free. And if somebody like values your advice and they want to kind of like solidify or formalize that relationship, for the last few years, I've been in a situation to do that. So in about 2.5 years, I've deployed about 350K of my own money, built a portfolio of about 30 plus logistics technology focused early stage startups. And really my kind of goal in doing that was I wanted to align myself with some great founders, obviously take the opportunity to try to make some money personally, but more importantly, through the performance of the companies that I've been involved with at Cargomatic and ShipHawk and Airspace, we were outperforming most venture funds, and the money I put into those businesses had done much better than dollar for dollar than most VC funds were doing. So I thought, if I could do that on a larger scale, maybe there's a fund to be raised someday. So happily running, a company post the sale of Manning's last year. I took a role running another private equity backed company as a CEO, and was having a great time building a team in the US and doing some fun things. But this opportunity with Zebox came along, and there was a few things about it that just made it extremely attractive to me in terms of where I'm at today. So, part of the reason why I've been able to, participate in as many investments as I have in 2.5 years is because, I try to be like, even though I'm a low check size investor, I try to be a high leverage investor, in these startups. And so I've been able to kind of like help them with corporate partnerships and help them find their product market fit, help them get their first hire from my network, or whatever the case is. Maybe it's just like telling them every once a month, like, hey buddy, you're doing great, don't quit, but for whatever reason, my contributions have been valued with these founders, and then they introduced me to more founders, and it's just kind of grown organically from there. When I set out originally, I didn't expect to deploy this much money. I'm not a wealthy guy, but this was important to me. And fortunately, my wife has supported me on it thus far. But really, the opportunity with Zebox was, it was founded about 3 years ago by Rodolphe Sade, who's this billionaire shipping magnate. He's the chairman of CMA CGM, the 3rd largest steamship line in the world. He's the son of the founder, and CMA CGM has been transformative in developing containerized shipping. The boxes that are all stuck out in the ports right now, they own those vessels and those boxes, and they've revolutionized that industry over the last 40 years. And Rodolph noticed about, many years ago that the innovation was slowing down in the organization. The bigger they got, the harder it was to innovate. You were actually the first person to tell me about the book Innovator's Dilemma, but this is the dilemma inherent in large organizations is the doers are doing and there's no room or oxygen for innovation or creative thought. And so Rodolph believed that you needed to separate that and that there was an opportunity to cooperate amongst other stakeholders in the supply chain and curate a base of corporate partners instead of having one internal accelerator. This is a multi-corporate accelerator, and we're currently supported by about 10. Not all of them are public yet, but we'll be announcing throughout the fourth quarter of this year the remainder of the corporate partners. But companies like CMA CGM, third largest steamship line, their freight forwarding division, CEVA Logistics, top 5 global freight forwarder, one of the largest railroads in the U.S., one of the largest ports in the U.S., one of the largest software companies in logistics and supply chain visibility. All of these companies have come together and they're paying fees annually to support the operations of Zebox. And so, my role and the team that I'm building's role here in the U.S. is to work with these corporate partners to identify opportunities for innovation inside their business, help coach them on developing the proper framework for innovation, and kind of create some entry points and gateways into their org for an innovation program, and then also define some common problem statements that can be addressed through innovative technology and the introduction of some startups into these large corporate partners. So once we have a common understanding and some aligned timelines around when we'd like to solve these problems by, then we'll be sourcing startups to go out and solve these problems. And then on the startup side, the common problem that I've seen in my career and the thing I'm seeing here at Zebox is that every startup founder wants to punch above their weight class, and they want to get their product in front of the kind of titans of industry as early as they can. And I'm seeing now, as I see founders continuously pitching to startups or to corporate executives, is that these corporate executives are brilliant people. Like, they're Ivy League educated, they're super, super knowledgeable about their slice of the universe. You start getting into Silicon Valley buzzwords and you start pitching a big customer like you're pitching a VC, like you're having the wrong message for the wrong audience. And basically it's like inside of these big corporations, especially in supply chain and logistics, where you're so executional focused, the operation, the moving of the boats, the moving of the trains, the moving of the freight, the operation of the warehouse, that's the central nervous system and the heartbeat of the organization. All of the people are like an immune system, and startups feel like germs when they first get introduced. So really, like, these organizations are structured to filter out new ideas because everybody, has conviction around the way they're doing things today. So at Zebox, we're hiring entrepreneurs in residence and really great staff to coach these startups, help them develop their messaging. And oftentimes these startups are just an idea, it's a concept. So we can help them, get from 0 to 1 and match them up with folks that can help develop their prototype, help them find a founding team, and really help them incubate their concept until they're ready to go. What we're seeing probably the most traction in so far in the first couple of months of my journey here is what I'm considering more like macceleration, like startups that are already at like the Series A, maybe Series B, range, where they develop their product, they have some product market fit, maybe supply chain is a new vertical they're trying to go into, or maybe they only have a couple of marquee customers in the supply chain space, but they're going to be able to address and solve the problems of our corporate partners. Like, we're able to kind of reach into those networks and connect those dots and really facilitate some healthy dialogues. And so it's cool to work with these big companies and be welcomed in there with open arms. And I'm the guy like wearing a t-shirt and jeans in the boardroom at the whiteboard. But really, it's fun to kind of like play this translation layer right now, and also learning a ton about big company and big companies around the world, which is not sort of my domain expertise to this point.
Is this the most fun you've had professionally?
It's hard to say because it's like everything I do is so fun. But I'll tell you, I've traveled 9 out of 10 weeks. This is my first week in Omaha. I've gotten more work done in my co-working space here in Omaha because I can sit here and mow through and execute, and there's no distractions. But when I get there's a certain part about traveling with children, as you know, and young children, and leaving the wife behind and putting all that work on her that gives you a little anxiety, like the Sunday blues a little bit. But man, when I get on the plane and I start heading to the next city and like I'm going to, map something out with a big company, or I'm sitting there watching a founder present his project to a large corporate partner and I can see the nods across the Zoom meeting. Like that is awesome because like that's the lightning. That's where these businesses can go from, meaningful to valuable. And to be a part of that, like, I mean, I have goosebumps right now thinking about it because it's like, so when I first got offered this job, I told my wife, like, I think I have to take this. And she's like, but you love what you're doing. And I was like, yeah, but if they would have paid me to lift weights and chase girls in high school, I would have taken that job too. So this is probably as close to that as I'll get, like coaching founders and talking logistics tech all day,
Couple last questions. If you could go back and give 18-year-old Charley one piece of advice, what would it be?
18-year-old Charley, one piece of advice. I would say start earlier. Get going. I don't regret playing college football one bit, but if I wanted to be playing on TV, maybe not go to Idaho State. If I wanted to be closer to my girlfriend at the time, maybe don't let her, get away. Maybe like take these things more seriously. Certainly from a family planning perspective, having 3 kids, I came from 5, Katie came from 6. We thought we'd have a dozen kids put together. We started at 30 because we really thoroughly enjoyed our 20s and being together and traveling. I wouldn't mind, having a couple more children now. The ship sailed on that one. So, I think for me, it's like it took me going to college and it took me like starting my career at World Express and like cutting my teeth there and climbing the ladder to really get the confidence. But like, I wasn't any better prepared to start my own journey and start my first company than I probably would have been. And now that I'm working with so many founders and so many just like super, super captivating people, they're half my age and twice as smart. I just see in their eyes, it's like, dude, you don't even know what you don't know. And that's the beauty of this whole equation is like, you're unjaded, you're unbridled, like you're gonna find some oxygen here. And you found me, which tells me that you're out there like clicking around at night looking for somebody that can help you. And it's a different world. We can all kind of like draw the differences between today's world. You and I didn't meet on Twitter until there was or reconnect again on Twitter until there was a Twitter, right? But the point is, I think if success is meant to be yours, put yourself out there in the universe, get going, open your mind, talk to people smarter than you, listen more than you speak, and just go find it. Just go find the happiness.
You gonna let your kids, your sons, play football?
So we're in transition right now. We've been a flag only family. I've tried to keep my kids distracted by playing competitive sports in every capacity. I had, like you had, many friends who ended up in tough situations based on the concussion situation, including a guy that went to Poway that we both knew, Drew Walrus, who played at Colorado and then for the Rams, who unfortunately committed suicide. Like Junior Seau, shot themselves in the stomach to preserve their brain. So, in my inner network, there's always been this like worry that like my kids would want to play football and I'd have to be in this situation. And my wife and I have always been anti, and I've always told her that if it comes down to my son playing football or smoking pot behind the bleachers because he's rebelling because I won't let him play football, like that's going to be an easy choice for me. And then I moved here to Nebraska, and I kid you not, for the first flag football practice I took my son to, I was an assistant coach. We had more dads on the field than children, which is incredible. Like, do the math on that. So football is the big deal here in Nebraska, obviously. So they start playing tackle at 7th grade, how we played flag football in middle school at 7th grade. They play tackle here. So my 6th going on 7th grader is committed that he's going to be on that 7th grade team next year. His little brother, Luke, has never let him do something without him. So Luke's in a long debate with his mother right now about what we're doing next year. So for me, I think I'm going to put in a request to Santa to get a helmet and some shoulder pads and maybe get these guys studding up in the basement this winter and seeing if we can't get them prepared to do it in a safe and fun way.
Appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a pleasure knowing you for all these years, and you've been someone who I've, like I said, I think I've learned a ton from. just
Vice versa, man.
yeah. So it's been great, man. I wish you all the best in the future, and look forward to more opportunities to work together on stuff.
You as well, man. Tell Erica and the girls I said hello, and look forward to staying in touch. Loving your podcast so far. I listened to the JR episode. Running his mouth as always. Miss that guy, but really, really appreciate you putting this out there, man. Great content, and looking forward to staying in touch with your podcast. Keep going, man.
Cheers, buddy.